Emma had spent most of her Friday feeling restless. The autumn air outside Seattle carried a chill, but the quiet inside her home felt colder. Her husband, David, had been coming home late for months. Work, meetings, travel, there was always a reason. Their conversations had turned short and polite, their laughter replaced by silence. Sometimes Emma wondered if he even noticed how lonely she had become. That afternoon, as she folded laundry, her phone buzzed with a message from him. "Hey, can we have Mark over for dinner tonight? He's been going through a tough time. Might be good for him." Emma paused. Mark, David's old college friend. He had visited them many times over the years, usually bringing warmth and easy conversation into the house. He was the kind of man who remembered birthdays, who smiled easily, who made everyone feel comfortable. He had divorced recently, Emma remembered. David had mentioned it once, briefly. She texted back, "Sure, I'll make something nice." Cooking gave her purpose that evening. She decided to make roasted chicken with herbs, mashed potatoes, and a simple lemon pie. The kitchen filled with the smell of garlic and rosemary, and for the first time in a while, she felt like doing something with care. She put on soft music and watched the golden light fall through the windows as the day began to fade. When she heard the car pull into the driveway, her heartbeat quickened for reasons she couldn't explain. David walked in first, looking tired but polite. "Smells amazing," he said, giving her a quick smile before heading to the living room. Mark followed behind him, holding a bottle of wine and his familiar kind smile. "Emma, you look great," he said sincerely. "It's been too long." "Too long," she agreed, taking the wine. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." They sat down together, the three of them. For a while, everything felt easy. Stories from the past, harmless teasing, warm laughter. Emma enjoyed watching David smile again, even if it wasn't because of her. But soon his phone buzzed, and his focus began to drift. He answered one call, then another. By dessert, he had stepped outside to handle something quick. The laughter faded, and silence filled the table. Mark noticed it too. He looked at her kindly. "He's still a workaholic, huh?" Emma tried to laugh. "Yes, I guess it's who he is now." Mark leaned forward a little, his voice lower. "It's strange, isn't it? How life changes us. We chase things we think matter, jobs, goals, success, and forget to breathe." His words surprised her. There was no judgment in them, only quiet truth. "You sound like you've been there," she said softly. He nodded. "I have. My marriage fell apart while I was too busy trying to keep everything perfect. By the time I looked up, the person I loved was gone." Emma looked down at her plate. She didn't know what to say, but her chest tightened. Something about his honesty felt rare, comforting. "I'm sorry," she murmured. Mark smiled faintly. "Don't be. It taught me something important. Happiness doesn't wait for us to have time. We have to make time for it." His words lingered like an echo. The kitchen light flickered gently above them, casting soft shadows on the walls. Emma could feel her throat tighten. Not from sadness exactly, but from realization. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her that way, directly, truthfully, without pretending. When David came back inside, cheerful again as if nothing had happened, the moment broke. He poured wine, made another joke, and the rhythm of conversation returned. Yet something had quietly shifted. Emma wasn't sure if it was her heart or the air in the room, but it was there. As the evening wound down, Mark stood and helped her clear the table. David was already scrolling through his phone again, half listening. Mark stacked the plates beside her at the sink. "You really went all out tonight," he said. "This house feels peaceful. It's nice." She smiled, her hands still in the dishwater. "It hasn't felt that way in a long time." He glanced at her, his expression soft but unreadable. "Well, it should. You deserve that." For a second, she couldn't speak. It wasn't a flirtation, not even a compliment. It was kindness, simple, unexpected, and strangely powerful. Before she could reply, David's voice echoed from the hallway. "Mark, you heading out?" Mark gave her a small smile and dried his hands. "Yeah. Thanks for dinner, Emma. You're amazing, as always." "Take care, Mark," she said quietly. She watched from the doorway as he left, walking toward his car under the dim porch light. David waved goodbye quickly before shutting the door behind him. Then, as usual, he disappeared into his office to finish work. The house went silent again, except for the soft ticking of the clock. Emma leaned against the wall and took a slow breath. She should have felt tired, but her mind wouldn't rest. Mark's voice echoed in her thoughts. We chase things we think matter, and forget to breathe. She looked at the empty plates, at the quiet rooms, and realized something she hadn't admitted before. She wasn't lonely because she was alone. She was lonely because she'd stopped being seen. That night, lying in bed beside her husband, she stared at the ceiling long after he fell asleep. She wasn't thinking of Mark as a man, but of what he'd said, of how one sentence had made her remember the woman she used to be before routine took over her heart. For the first time in years, Emma didn't feel numb. She felt something, and she had no idea that a single dinner, one she almost hadn't agreed to, would be the start of something that would quietly change everything in her life. The next morning, the house felt unusually quiet. David had left early for a meeting, leaving only a note on the kitchen counter that read, "Didn't want to wake you. Back late." Emma stood there for a while, reading it again before setting it down. It was a kind note, polite, thoughtful in appearance, but somehow it felt hollow. Like everything else lately, it was just a gesture without warmth behind it. As she made coffee, her mind wandered back to last night, to the way Mark had looked at her, not with admiration or pity, but understanding. His words kept replaying in her head. Happiness doesn't wait for us to have time. She didn't fully know why it stuck so deeply, but something about it wouldn't let go. Around noon, she received a message. It was from Mark. "Hey, thanks again for dinner. You're a great host. Hope you're not too tired today." She smiled despite herself. His tone was friendly, nothing unusual, but it carried an ease that she hadn't felt in a long time. She typed back, "Not at all. It was nice seeing you again. You brought life to that dinner table." He replied quickly. "Well, someone had to." David looked buried under work. Emma hesitated, then added, "Yeah, that's been him lately. Always somewhere else." There was a pause before his next message came through. "Don't let his silence make you forget how much you matter." Her heart tightened. She stared at those words for a long time. No one had said something like that to her in years. Not out of romance, but out of simple care. She didn't know how to respond, so she just typed, "Thank you." That night, when David came home, the contrast between the two men became impossible not to notice. David was distracted, his phone glued to his hand, his words brief. Emma wanted to ask him how his day was, but his tone said he wasn't really there. She sat across from him at dinner, trying to remember the last time they had looked each other in the eyes and actually talked. After he went to bed, she sat alone on the couch, her thoughts restless. The house was silent, the kind that makes you hear your own heartbeat. She scrolled through her phone, and before she could stop herself, she opened her chat with Mark again. He had sent another message earlier in the evening. "Found an old photo of the three of us from that cabin trip years ago. You two looked happy." She smiled faintly. "We were," she wrote back. "Or at least I think we were. What changed?" he asked. It was a simple question, but it cut deeper than she expected. She typed slowly, "I think we forgot to look at each other. We just got lost in everything else." He didn't reply right away. When he did, the words were gentle. "It happens to a lot of people. Sometimes love doesn't end. It just gets quiet. Too quiet." That line stayed with her all night. Love gets quiet. It was such a sad, true thought. Over the next few days, their messages continued. Short, harmless exchanges about life, books, and work. There was nothing inappropriate, nothing hidden, but there was a warmth that Emma had missed. He talked about starting over, about trying to rebuild his life after his divorce. She shared small things too, about her garden, her paintings she'd stopped finishing, and the way the world outside her window seemed both close and far at once. Mark listened. He always did, and without realizing it, Their conversations began filling the empty spaces that David's silence had left behind. One evening, a week after the dinner, David mentioned he'd be going on a business trip for a few days. "You'll be fine, right?" he asked, almost as an afterthought. "Of course," she said. "Don't worry about me." When he left, the house felt even emptier. The silence pressed harder, and for the first time, she admitted to herself that she was tired. Not physically, but emotionally. That night, she went for a walk. The streets were quiet, lit by soft streetlights, and the sky was a dark blue canvas dotted with stars. She didn't mean to call Mark. It just happened. Maybe it was the quiet, maybe the loneliness. But when he answered, his familiar voice brought an odd calm. "Emma?" he said, surprised but warm. "Everything okay?" She hesitated. "Yeah, I just needed to hear a friendly voice." He chuckled softly. "You called the right person, then. I'm always up for talking." They walked and talked for nearly an hour. About nothing and everything. He told her about his attempts at cooking, about burning an omelet earlier that morning. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. When she got home, she stood in her doorway, still holding her phone. "Mark," she said quietly before hanging up. "I'm glad you're around." There was a pause on his end before he replied. "I am too, Emma. More than you know." The next morning, she woke up feeling different. Not because she felt something she shouldn't, but because she felt alive. She went back to her art studio, brushed the dust off her old easel, and started painting again. Her strokes were uneven, but they were hers. Days passed, and she began to notice small things. How sunlight warmed her kitchen floor, how birds sounded outside her window, how color returned to her days. Mark never pushed, never crossed a line, but his presence, even through a phone screen, reminded her that she still had a voice, still had a heart that could feel. When David returned, tired from travel, Emma greeted him kindly. But she realized that while he was still her husband, he no longer knew who she really was anymore. And she wasn't sure he wanted to. That evening, while David worked in his office, she sat by the window, phone in hand. A message came through. "You sound happier these days," Mark wrote. "I can feel it in your words." She smiled, typing back, "Maybe I am." "You helped remind me that I still have more to live for," he replied after a moment. "That makes me glad. You deserve that, Emma. Don't let anyone dim that light again." Her chest tightened with a quiet warmth. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. And though she didn't know what would happen next, she knew one thing for sure. The night she invited her husband's friend for dinner had set something in motion. Not an affair, not a secret, but a rediscovery of herself, of what it meant to feel seen again, and deep down, she couldn't help but wonder if fate had really sent Mark that night for a reason she hadn't yet understood. Days turned into weeks, and Emma found herself smiling again, quietly, naturally, like someone who had finally remembered what peace felt like. She didn't realize how much her world had shrunk over the years until she started letting small joys back in. A morning walk, a cup of coffee on the porch, paint-stained fingers after hours at her canvas. Life wasn't fixed, but it was waking up again. Mark had become a steady voice in the background of her days. He never overstepped, never said too much, but his words had a way of reaching her at just the right moment. Sometimes he would send a photo of a sunrise from his porch, or a quote he thought she might like. Once, he messaged her, "You know, the world feels bigger when you have someone to talk to." She had stared at that message for a long time, realizing how much truth was hidden inside it. David noticed the change in her too. How she laughed more, how she seemed lighter. But instead of asking what had shifted, he treated it like a pleasant mystery. He assumed maybe she had just gotten over her phase of sadness. The truth was, he didn't really want to know. His focus remained buried in meetings, deadlines, and the glowing screen that seemed to replace real connection. One evening, Emma decided to invite a few neighbors over for a small dinner. David agreed half-heartedly but ended up working late, as usual. Mark happened to call earlier that day, and she mentioned the dinner. Without hesitation, he said, "Need an extra pair of hands? I'm not bad with table settings." At first, she hesitated. It felt strange to invite him again, but something about his kindness made it feel harmless. "Sure," she said, "if you don't mind helping." That night, when he arrived, the house felt alive again. He brought flowers, soft white lilies that filled the room with a light scent. "For the chef," he said, smiling, handing them to her. The dinner went well, filled with laughter and easy conversation. Everyone seemed to enjoy themselves, but what Emma noticed most was how Mark brought warmth wherever he went. He listened, he joked, he made people feel comfortable. It was something David used to do, long ago. When the guests left and David still hadn't returned home, Emma found herself standing in the quiet kitchen with Mark, washing dishes side by side. The sound of running water and soft clinks of plates filled the silence. Mark looked at her for a moment before saying, "You know, this place feels different now." She looked up. "Different how?" "Like it finally has life again," he said. "I think that's because of you." His words struck her deeper than she expected. For so long, she had felt invisible in her own home, her presence fading into the routine. But now, for once, someone saw her, not as a wife, not as someone's support system, but as her. She smiled faintly. "You have a way with words, Mark," he shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe I just say what I see." There was a quiet pause between them. It wasn't awkward, just still, meaningful. Then his phone buzzed and the moment broke. "I should go," he said softly. As he left, Emma stood at the door watching him walk away, his figure fading into the cool evening air. Something inside her whispered that the world she knew was quietly changing, but she didn't yet know how. That night, David finally came home past midnight. He mumbled an apology, kissed her cheek distractedly, and went straight to bed. Emma sat alone for a while longer, staring at the empty wine glass Mark had used earlier. It was strange, how two people could live under the same roof and yet feel like strangers, while another person, a friend, could make you feel seen without even trying. The next morning, she woke up early and found herself painting again. Her canvas was filled with color, warm tones of gold and orange, not the dull blues and grays she'd been drawn to before. When Mark texted her, "Did you sleep okay?" she sent him a photo of her painting instead. "That's beautiful," he replied. "It looks like sunlight after a long storm." She smiled. "That's exactly what I was thinking." Weeks passed like that. Their connection deepened, not through big words, but through small, real moments. He never crossed a line, never made her feel guilty or confused. It was friendship, but it carried something unspoken, something she didn't know how to name. One Saturday afternoon, Mark invited her to an art exhibit downtown. "You've been painting again," he said. "You should see what others are creating too." David was away for work again, so she agreed. The gallery was quiet, with soft music playing in the background and the faint smell of paint and coffee in the air. They walked through the room slowly, admiring the art. Emma paused in front of one piece, a painting of two figures standing apart, facing a sunset. The light between them was glowing, but they didn't touch. Mark stood beside her and said quietly, "It's strange how distance can look beautiful in art but hurt in real life." She looked at him, and their eyes met. For a long moment they didn't speak. There was no need to. The air between them carried all the words they couldn't say out loud. Afterward, they went to a small cafe nearby. The conversation was easy again, about memories, about dreams they hadn't talked about in years. At one point, Emma laughed and said, "Do you ever feel like we found each other again at the wrong time?" Mark smiled softly. "Maybe it's the right time. Maybe we both just needed someone to remind us that it's okay to feel alive." Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to say, so she looked out the window instead. Rain had started to fall, gentle and steady. When they left, he offered her his jacket, and she accepted. The walk back to her car was quiet, the sound of rain filling the space between them. Before she got in, Mark said, "Emma, Whatever happens next, don't lose that spark again. You've got too much heart to live half asleep." She nodded, unable to find her voice. Driving home that night, Emma felt everything: confusion, guilt, gratitude, and something deeper she couldn't name. She wasn't in love, at least not in the way movies showed it, but she had rediscovered something within herself: warmth, connection, hope. When she got home, David was still away. She placed Mark's jacket on the chair and stood in the middle of the room, listening to the rain tapping against the windows. For the first time in years, she didn't feel lonely. The following morning, she wrote in her journal, something she hadn't done since college. Maybe love isn't just about who stays beside you, but who helps you remember who you are. She didn't know where things would go from there. But she knew one thing: Mark's words had changed something in her forever. The story wasn't about a forbidden romance. It was about rediscovery, of self, of meaning, of emotional truth. And yet, in the quiet corners of her heart, Emma knew this. Some words, once spoken, could never be unheard. The rain hadn't stopped that week. It felt as if the sky itself was carrying Emma's thoughts, heavy, quiet, and full of things left unsaid. Life had settled into a strange balance. David remained busy, caught up in his world of meetings and screens, while Emma found comfort in her art and the calm friendship she shared with Mark. They hadn't met again since the night of the gallery, but they texted sometimes, small things, warm things. It was a connection that lived in the spaces between moments, never too much, never too little. Then, one Friday evening, David surprised her. He came home earlier than usual, holding a bouquet of lilies, the same kind Mark had brought weeks ago. "I thought we could have dinner together tonight," he said, smiling awkwardly. Emma froze for a second. It had been so long since he'd done something like that. She smiled back, trying not to show how unexpected it felt. "That sounds nice," she replied softly. Dinner was simple: pasta, wine, quiet laughter that came and went. For the first time in months, David seemed relaxed, almost like the man she had fallen in love with years ago. As they talked, she realized how much she had missed this version of him. He told her about a project he had finally completed, and for once, he wasn't just talking about work. He was talking about how proud he felt. Emma listened, really listened. But when he asked, "You've been different lately. Happier, I think. What changed?" she hesitated. 1,000 thoughts ran through her mind. How could she explain that what changed was someone reminding her she was still alive inside? Instead, she smiled and said, "I started painting again." David nodded, relief softening his face. "That's good, Em. You always had a gift for it." His words felt genuine, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like they were strangers. Later that night, as they cleaned the dishes together, her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Mark. "Hope you're doing okay. The rain made me think of that painting you showed me." She looked at it for a moment, then quietly put her phone face down. David didn't ask who it was, but she noticed how he glanced at her. Curious, maybe even cautious. That weekend, she and David decided to go for a drive along the coast. The ocean had always been their place, where they used to walk barefoot, share dreams, talk about everything. They hadn't been there in years. The air was cool, the waves steady, and for the first time, Emma felt a strange kind of peace. They sat on a rock near the shore, watching the sunset. "I missed this," David said. "I missed us." Emma turned to look at him. His words felt honest, but also fragile, like they belonged to a version of them that time had already passed by. "I did too," she whispered. He reached for her hand, and she let him. They didn't speak for a while, just sat there, letting the sound of the waves fill the silence that years had built between them. In that moment, she realized something important. It wasn't just love that fades when people drift apart. It's also understanding, effort, and the will to be seen. When they returned home, she checked her phone again. Another message from Mark, just a simple one. Sometimes silence says what words can't. She read it twice before replying. You're right. Then she placed the phone away and didn't check it again that night. Over the next few days, life began to feel normal again. David seemed to be trying, coming home early, asking her about her art, even offering to hang one of her paintings in his office. She appreciated it. She wanted it to work. But a quiet truth lingered inside her. No matter how much she tried, something in her had changed forever. One afternoon, she was at her studio finishing a painting when Mark showed up unexpectedly. He looked tired but calm, holding a coffee cup and that same familiar smile. I was nearby and thought I'd stop by, he said. Emma hesitated for a moment, then smiled. You still know how to surprise me? They talked easily, as if no time had passed. He asked to see her new work, and when she showed him the canvas, an abstract piece full of golden light and deep blue shadows, he stared for a long moment. This feels like you, he said softly. Like you found yourself again. His words hit her deeper than she expected. She didn't know how to thank him, not just for the compliment, but for everything he had unknowingly done for her. He hadn't given her love, not in the romantic sense. He had given her something rarer, clarity. She looked at him and said, You know, you came into my life at the exact moment I needed someone to remind me who I was. Mark smiled faintly. Then I'm glad I did. But you should know something, Emma. I'm leaving town next week. Got a job offer in Oregon. It's a big move, but it feels right. Her heart dropped for a moment. She hadn't expected that. That's great, Mark. You deserve it, she said, forcing a smile. He looked at her, eyes steady. You'll be fine, you know. You don't need anyone to make your world bright anymore. You already learned how to do that. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. Thank you, she whispered. When he left, she watched his car disappear down the road. It wasn't sadness she felt. It was gratitude, deep and quiet. Some people come into your life not to stay, but to change you. That night, she sat beside David on the couch. He was reading something on his tablet, and for a while, they didn't speak. Then she said, Do you ever think about how people change us? Even ones who aren't meant to stay? David looked at her, confused but gentle. I think that's how life works, he said. We're all just learning from each other one way or another. She smiled. Yeah, I think you're right. Over the next few months, Emma focused on her art. She began selling her paintings, even hosting a small exhibit at a local gallery. David supported her, proud of how far she had come. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was real again, built not on the illusion of old love, but on understanding, honesty, and quiet appreciation. Every once in a while, she would think about Mark, about his words, his kindness, the way he saw her without judgment. But instead of sadness, she felt peace. Some stories weren't meant to be love stories. Some were just chapters of rediscovery, of remembering that the heart can open again, even after years of silence. One evening, months later, she stood on the porch watching another sunset. The light was golden, soft, and endless. David came up behind her, wrapping an arm gently around her shoulder. What are you thinking about? He asked. She smiled faintly. Just about how some people come into your life to remind you what matters. He kissed her temple. And what's that? Being present, she said quietly, and never forgetting who you are. The sky turned orange, the air smelled like rain, and for the first time in a long while, everything felt right. Not perfect, but beautifully real. And in her heart, Emma carried those words forever, the ones that had once changed everything. Sometimes silence says what words can't. It was not a love story about two people finding each other. It was a story about one woman finding herself, and learning that sometimes the greatest connections don't end with a promise, but with peace.